Welcome back to the show. Today I'm titling this episode, Tear Down This Wall, and you're going to understand where I'm going at the end of this segment. But I want to share a quick overview of part of our lives and then share with you maybe a broader concept that will maybe remind you of some of the things that you do in life can impact a lot more people than you can imagine. So let me just set the scene. Way back in 1987, I was working at Caldor Department Store, which I don't think is in existence anymore. I started in a store in Baltimore, Maryland, was transferred to a store in Westminster, Maryland, and again, we're talking now 1987. In the spring of '87, met a part-time individual by the name of Tammy. This was in May of '87. Within a very short amount of time, we started dating. And in April of 1988, we got married. So in about 1989, we decided we were going to start to raise a family. So we started to try to have children. And a couple months go by, several months go by, and we were not able to have a child. So year one goes by, year two goes by, year 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And all during this time, our friends and family are having children. So we would go to a mall and eat out or go shopping for holidays or birthdays or whatever, and we would see these little babies in strollers, and we would leave the mall or the restaurant in tears because why can't we have children? So it was a very emotional time, very difficult time for my wife and I, because we really didn't understand what was going on. I mean, we'd had lab work done and doctor visits and everything else, and everything seemed to be in working order. So in the mid-90s or so, I saw a program on a news show called 2020 about Romanian orphans. And I sat in my front room of the house we had bought, and I began to cry. Not just cry, but sob, because I realized that there were these hurting kids that were starving to death over in this part of the world that didn't have moms and dads, didn't have people that would care for them. So I got really emotionally involved in this news story, and I talked to my wife. I said, why don't we consider adopting them? And this was about maybe 6, 7 years into our marriage. And she says, no, I want to try to keep trying. So I'm not a science major by any stretch, but I realized that, you know what, things were not moving nearly as quickly as I thought that they should move just based on basic science. So we kept trying to have kids and couldn't have kids. So make even a longer story short, in about 1997, we decided that we were going to adopt. So I got this phone call from one of my clients. At that time, I was in the insurance industry, and she said that, John, I'm pregnant with, I can't remember, my 3rd or 4th child, and I don't really want this child. So I heard that you and Tammy are trying to have kids, and if you are interested in adopting my child, let me know. And I had gone over, and she told me to come see her, so I went and saw her. She was several miles from our house. And I said, give me a couple days to talk to my wife, and I will get back to you. Well, a couple of days later, I went back to this person, and she had had an abortion. She had aborted the baby that she told me about that we could have potentially adopted. So the guilt trip and the horror of that decision haunted me for a lot of years, because I thought that maybe if I was quicker, if I would have gotten there 24 hours sooner or a day and a half sooner, that child's life may have been saved. So we started interviewing adoption agencies, not only in the United States, in our area, but also in other parts of the country. And we interviewed an organization in the Baltimore, Maryland area, and told them that we didn't care about the color of the child. We just wanted to help a child that needed a good home. So they interviewed us, we interviewed them, and they in essence told us that we couldn't adopt black children because we're not black. And that threw me back quite a bit. It's like, wait a minute, if it's a hurting child, then why wouldn't you allow us to adopt any child? So that put a real sour taste in our mouth in a tremendous way. So we began to interview more adoption agencies. So one day I got a call from a young lady named Terry, and she had adopted a couple children from an organization called Nightlight Christian Adoptions. And she said that the attorney, Ron Stoddard, was flying in from California from that agency to Maryland because there were a number of families in the Gaithersburg area of Maryland that had used the services of Nightlight Adoptions that are going to be at this meeting. So she heard about us through other people. So we went down and, which was at that time probably an hour drive from our house. And we're in a room with Ron Stoddard doing his speech about adoptions. And they were, then at the meeting, at the end of it, he asked the people that had adopted using Nightlight to come up front. And I can't remember, 10 or 12 families came up, and they stood up front with the children that they adopted. And my wife knew right there that Nightlight Christian Adoption was the adoption agency that we were going to adopt through. So Nightlight at the time, a large percentage of their adoptions were through Russia. So fast forward a very, very long story. In February of 1998, my wife and I got on a plane and traveled to St. Petersburg, Russia, after going through the process and the interview process and the paperwork and the money and all that stuff to adopt a couple of children. So we flew to Russia and adopted a little boy and a girl. And it was a very emotional situation. We had been married almost 10 years by then, and were new parents. So we had babysat kids before, and we know how to handle kids, obviously, but to be called mama and papa at the time was a pretty big deal. So we had 2 kids, and we were done. So some months later, a year later or so, or less than a year later, actually, my wife got a check from a former employer, a retirement check that she had earned, and the check was approaching the amount that it would cost to adopt another child. We had already two kids. We had bought a slightly larger house, and each child had their own bedroom now. And she says, well, you know, the girl that we adopted was almost 5 years old. The boy was 2.5 at the time. Let's adopt a little baby. So longer story short, we go through the process of, we chose the same Nightlight Adoptions, went through the paperwork, and in December of 1999, flew back to Russia and adopted a little baby girl. 6 months old, we called her Lindsay Alina. So we had 3 kids. The girl shared a room. Matthew had his own room, the boy, and we were done. So I decided to take this trip in the mid-2000s or so back to Russia to take a humanitarian trip, and take as much stuff as we could, soccer balls and toys and medicines and shoes and everything, just as many orphanages as possible. So our church helped us tremendously with that goal. So I decided to take my parents along because they had never been overseas like that. So we flew over. And before I was about to leave, I was shopping in a store. I had 2 shopping carts full of stuff, clothes and shoes and things. And Ron Stoddard, the attorney from Nightlight Christian Adoptions, called me and said, John, I heard you're taking a trip overseas. We have a little boy that needs a home. I said, Ron, whoa, stop. We, less than a year earlier, had adopted our 3rd child, and we're broke. We can't do that right now. I said, we can't do that. He says, okay, I thought I'd check. I'd really, just thought I'd ask since you're coming over anyway. I said, well, Ron, you got me on the phone. How old is this child, this boy? He says, well, his birthday is May 4th, 1999. May 4th, 1999. Well, I'm in the middle of a Walmart store in Howard County, Maryland, and I start going, whoa, 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 like this. And Ron's like, what's wrong with you? I was getting chills on my arms and down my neck and the back of my head. And it's like, he says, what's wrong with you? I said, when's his birthday? May 4th, 1999. I said, Ron, would you mind checking the birthday again? He checked the birthday again, May 4th, 1999. I said, Ron, that's Lindsay's birthday, our third child's birthday. Same day, same month, same year, May 4th, 1999. So I'm like, whoa, how can this be? So my parents and I travel overseas. We're sitting in one of the orphanages where two of our three kids came from at the time. So I'm sitting on the floor unpacking the bags of material and goods and medicines and things. And they happened to walk in this little toddler boy, blonde hair. Sergey was his name at the time. And they walked him in, and that was the little boy born May 4th, 1999 that Ron talked to me about on the phone. So I'm sitting there on the floor playing with this little kid. I'm fluent in Russian, very fluent in Russian. I know about 10 words, that's about it. So I'm not really fluent, obviously. So I know about 10 words, so I'm talking to him in Russian, telling him my name is John. So the doctor, the person who runs that particular orphanage across the room says, no, 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 Daddy, or she said, Papa, Papa. So she was telling me through this kid that I'm gonna be your father. And we hadn't made the decision. I had no idea where the money was going to come from to make this happen. But it was very evident, at least in our mind, that this little boy was going to be our son. So fast forward to June of 2001, my wife and I flew back to Russia. We then took Rebecca, our oldest, then Matthew, and Lindsay, our three existing children, with us on this trip. We flew overseas, adopted this little boy, Sergey, who's now named Timothy Sergey, and he became our fourth child. So by then we are done. Our house is shrinking. Within a month or so, month and a half of us adopting Tim, we moved into a larger house. We were able to do that, thank goodness. So I decided one day to have a meeting for other families in a hotel to help other people learn the benefits of adopting internationally, which maybe can learn from our struggles and our mistakes and our successes. So I told Ron Stoddard about it, the attorney from Nightlight, and he flew in from California. I did a lot of marketing for it, a lot of advertising for it, and a lot of effort went into getting a banquet room full of people that may want to adopt internationally. Well, the day came and 6 or 8 people showed up in a banquet room that could have held a couple hundred at least. So I was like major league depressed, embarrassed, and it was just humiliating. So Ron brought his photo album of waiting children that were waiting for moms and dads. And my wife and I are flipping through the album up in his hotel room after the event. And this little girl, the photograph of this little girl jumped out at us who had crossed eyes. Our Tim had crossed eyes at the time. And I began to cry. And I didn't know really why I was crying at the time. Because, we had 3 kids. We weren't interested in adopting anymore. But this little girl jumped out at us on this page that was pretty overwhelming. So I went out of the hotel room because I was embarrassed. Men aren't supposed to cry. So I walked out of the room, walked up and down the hall to get myself together, and came back. And there was something about this little girl that we knew that she was supposed to be our daughter. Now, this little girl lived in Belarus, not Russia. So that's near Poland, which is near Russia, but not in Russia. So we decided that we were going to adopt this girl. She was about 20 months old at the time. So we flew overseas in August of 2003 and adopted this little girl named Irina, I-R-I-N-A. We named her Juliana Irina. and just bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, excited. You know, they taught her how to say mama and papa, and it was a really great experience. While we were in the orphanage director's office, the orphanage director said, well, you did know that she has a sister in another orphanage across town. Now we're in Minsk, Belarus, right? Far, far away. And wait, whoa, time out. What? She has a sister in another orphanage across town. Well, I'll tell you this flat out, if we would have known that the little girl that we saw in the photo album with the crossed eyes had a sister, we probably would not have chosen that little girl with the crossed eyes because we weren't interested in adopting 2 more kids. We were going to do 1 more, but not 2. So it's like my wife and I are looking at ourselves like, what in the world is going on? So we get in the van that our driver had in Minsk. So we went over and met this little girl who's the sister, half-sister, if you will, of Juliana, Irina. And we're like, how in the world are we going to make this happen? How? Because we have to keep them together. We can't separate them. Now we know they're related. We can't leave them alone. So we started the process and the paperwork of trying to adopt this little girl named Svetlana at the time. Well, because of the kindness of a few people, we were able to raise almost all of the money to go back to Minsk in March of 2004 and adopt Svetlana, who we renamed Christina Svetlana, who is the half-sister of Juliana Irina. So if you've been following our family long enough, you know that in 2007, Juliana was stricken with cancer. And the cancer came back 7 more times. And she passed away in October of 2016 at the age of 14. But a bigger picture here, I think, came and happened way before we started thinking about adopting children. And it happened on June 12th, 1987, when Ronald Reagan was president of the United States. He flew to West Berlin, Germany, and he made a speech that at least part of that speech is hanging up in my office today and has been there for a number of years, because I believe that many things that you and I do, whether we think they're small things or big things, and the words we say, whether they're small words or big words, have more of an impact on society than we can possibly imagine. So in this speech, Reagan got up. Now, let me just paint the picture. We're talking in the middle of the Cold War. The Soviet Union was a dominating power in the world. The United States had weapons aimed at both the Soviet Union, and they had them aimed at us, thinking that we were going to attack them and or they were going to do some damage to our country. And Reagan really believed that that form of government was not good for humanity and for peace in our time. So let me just share a piece of his speech, just bits and pieces of it that will give you a context of the theme of today's show of Tear Down This Wall. He said this, quote, "To those listening in East Berlin, a special word. Although I cannot be with you, I address my remarks to you just as surely as to those standing here before me. Behind me stands a wall," he's talking about the Berlin Wall, "that encircles the free sectors of this city, part of the vast system of barriers that divides the entire continent of Europe." He says, farther south, there may be no visible, no obvious wall, but there remain armed guards and checkpoints all the same, still a restriction on the right to travel, still an instrument to impose upon ordinary men and women the will of the totalitarian state. We're talking about 1987 here. He said, a president of that time said, the German question is open as long as the Brandenburg Gate is closed. Well, today, he said, today I say, as long as this gate is closed, as long as this gate is closed, as long as this scar of a wall is permitted to stand, it is not the German question alone that remains open, but the question of freedom for all mankind. He goes on to say, where 4 decades ago there was rubble, today in West Berlin there is the greatest industrial output of any city in Germany. Busy office blocks, fine homes and apartments, proud avenues, and the spreading lawns of parkland. He goes, even today, the Soviet Union still cannot feed itself. After these 4 decades then, there stands before the entire world one great and inescapable conclusion, he says. Freedom leads to prosperity. He says, freedom replaces the ancient hatreds among the nations with peace. Freedom is the victor. He said this, there is one sign the Soviets can make that would be unmistakable, that would advance dramatically the cause of freedom and peace. Now he addressed the secretary, the president of the Soviet Union. He said this, General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, he says, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, he says, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Tear down this wall. Speaking of the Berlin Wall. Now there's a lot more to his speech that he said, but let me just pause and just open up a little bit more of what I'm trying to get across here today. There are many things in your life that you think don't matter, whether they're the words you do, whether the deeds you do, or actions that you take in your own life for the benefit of other people. I happen to believe that the speech that President Reagan made in 1987 was one of the means of my 6 children being able to be in the United States. I believe that if President Reagan had not ignored the advice of his advisors, because his advisors told him, at least some of them, not to keep in his text, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. They didn't want him to put that in there because that's a little bold, that's a little brash. But he insisted on keeping it in there. He said it anyway. What if he would not have said it? What if those words would not have been spoken to now my 6 children were able to be, I'll use the term rescued, from an environment that was not going to enable them to reach their full benefit of life, that would not allow them to reach their goals and their dreams in life? What if President Reagan would not have been voted in, number one? What if he would not have been born? What if he would not have gone through what he went through in life in order to be able to stand up in front of all these people so many years ago and say with very clear convictions in his own mind, in his own heart, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall? I'm asking you today that you and I both, I think, have opportunities in our lives that will dramatically change the lives of other people if we choose to stand up and do the right thing, even though maybe some people around us are going to say, you know what, John, that's going to ruffle some feathers. That's going to make some people uncomfortable. That's going to maybe do things that maybe you don't necessarily want done. Well, I'm telling you right now that what if President Reagan would not have gotten up and said those words if my 6 children would not be in the United States of America today? What if our Juliana in 2007, when she first got sick, would have still been in the orphanage? She wouldn't have made it for at least, she wouldn't have made it a year, let alone another 9 years. I'm wondering if you understand the impact of what you do every day extends way beyond what you do. I'm asking you today to look past your own nose, to be cautious of the words you use. I struggle with it every day. Believe me, I do. To say the wrong thing in the wrong way at the wrong time to the wrong people, I struggle with it too. But I'm asking you today to remember that everything you say and everything that you do impacts more people than you can possibly imagine. And then those people impact other people that you will never meet in your entire lifetime because you chose to stand up and do the right thing at the right time for the benefit of other people. That's what I'm trying to get across to you on this episode today, is do the right thing at the right time for other people, so other people can reap the benefits of their lives and realize their goals and their dreams that maybe they could not even imagine, but they can now as a result of what you said and or what you did. I hope this episode in our own painful story has maybe given you a little bit of another point of view to maybe do some things that are outside of your comfort zone, that maybe they're outside of your perceived ability to do and or to impact other people. But I guarantee you that when you step out and do the extraordinary for other people, the rewards you get back are beyond your wildest imagination. My name is John Carver. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back real soon.